So, in this session we are going to continue talking about a few more tools on authentication based attacks that could be used potentially by a penetration tester. So, we will first start looking at the concept of a man in the middle attack. Now, what we exactly call as a man in the middle attack is basically a form of an active eavesdropping in which the attacker sits in the middle between two parties that is actually trying to exchange messages, right. So, let us say A and B are two different users on the network who is actually trying to have a chat conversation between themselves. So, in this particular case A and B are trying to exchange messages between themselves, and when the penetration tester decides to actually make use of the man in the middle attack principle, he somehow tries to get inside this particular chat conversation in between A and B and tries to sort of get messages from A, store it possibly, then relay the messages to B, and then similarly get messages from B, the reply messages that is coming from B, store it, and then reply send the same messages back to A, right. So, he will do it in such a way that both A and B think that they are actually talking directly between each other and not realizing that there is somebody in the middle who is actually playing an attacker role in trying to hijack in terms of the messages that is actually coming in as part of this conversation exchange, right. Essentially here the penetration tester will try to sort of sandwich himself between A and B, the two parties that is actually trying to exchange messages, sort of get messages from both of them, store it, and then relay the message to the other party without the other party realizing that it has actually come in from this penetration tester, right. So, he will actually sort of very intelligently do this, and we will see what kind of tools are actually available for the penetration tester to make use of to do this kind of so there are actually many forms of the attack. So, if you look at something like a HackFi Pineapple wireless router, so this is a router that was actually available which would pretend itself to be a valid access point, a wireless access point that is sitting in a wireless network, but would sort of be doing the role of a man in the middle, where it would basically take the credentials or take the data and then relay it to the actual access point without the victim ever coming to know that he has been connected to a fake access point, right. It will actually try to act as if it is a very trusted access point. That is one way by which typically in a wireless environment man in the middle attack could be actually launched by the penetration tester. As far as a Kali Linux is concerned, there are actually certain tools that are actually available which will sort of sit between the victim and the attacker and transparently forward the traffic after capturing the traffic to the intended recipient, right. So, in most of the cases when the traffic is originating from the victim, the intended recipient will be the default gateway or the network router to which these packets have to be sent for it to be relayed out across to another some other part of the network, right. So, we will actually see what kind of tools are actually available which will basically be able to have this kind of setup done by the penetration tester for doing the man in the middle attack, and also using this setup from the captured traffic how the attacker could actually look at some critical information such as the login information, right. So, in this particular module we are going to be seeing the different tools that is actually available for doing this. So, a couple of tools that is very relevant for doing this kind of man in the middle attack is what is referred to as a dsniff and ARP spoof. Now, ARP spoof we will first take a look at the ARP spoof because that is basically the one that is really setting up the infrastructure. So, to say before the packets could actually be sniffed from the network after this basic setting of the infrastructure is actually done. So, ARP spoof is basically a command which is sort of used to poison the ARP cache, right. Now, if we recall from our previous IS3 course, we know that ARP basically stands for an address resolution protocol, and that is typically done at the layer 2 for sort of translating the IP address or rather converting the IP address into its corresponding MAC address, right, because the network layer, that is layer 3, basically operates with IP address as its data structure, but when it comes down to the next layer below the data link layer, it does not understand the IP address, but it basically goes and understands only the MAC address at layer 2, right. So, somebody has to do this translation from IP address to MAC address, and that is actually done by the ARP protocol, address resolution protocol, right. So, the ARP spoof tool basically what it actually tries to do is that it sorts of enables a fake response that could be sent as part of the ARP query that is actually coming in. So, how is this ARP protocol going to actually work? So, when a network layer datagram packet is actually injected into the data link layer, it basically tries to find out if it has actually got the MAC address for that particular destination IP address of the datagram in its local cache, in its local ARP cache, right. Now, suppose if it is already found, fortunately the ARP protocol is completely bypassed, so to say, and the MAC address is retrieved from the cache, and then a frame is constructed and then sent out, right. But on the other hand, if that particular entry, the MAC address entry for this particular destination IP address of this datagram packet is not found, this particular node is actually going to construct an ARP packet and then inject it into the network. Now, what is going to happen as part of this ARP packet getting injected into the network is it basically carries a message saying that I want to know who is having this particular IP address assigned to it, right. So, among all the nodes in the network, which node is actually having this particular IP address assigned to it, right. Now, in a normal configured network, it is expected that the actual node that has this IP address is what is going to respond back saying that this is my MAC address and I have this IP address with me, right, as part of the ARP response to the querying person, right, querying node. Now, in this case of a ARP spoof where we are going to poison the ARP cache with a sort of a fake entry, we are going to set up something where the attacker most possibly from his node will make the response to this particular ARP query saying that he is the one who is actually having this particular IP address, right. So, now we will see how that is actually being done. So, basically the goal of this process is to associate the attacker's MAC address with IP address of another host, which will basically cause the traffic meant for that particular IP address to be sent to the attacker, right. So, as a result, what are the first thing that we will actually try to do here is that we will really try to have ARP cache entry sort of poisoned with this fake ARP reply, and so in this particular case we will need to first know what is the like sort of the default gateway of the network and all that, which we have already seen lot of tools earlier in our course earlier, where we would be able to find out the basic network topology setup. So, this was basically part of our reconnaissance step if you recall the earlier modules that we had seen, right. So, we will assume that for using this particular tool of OpSpoof, we already have got the network gateway and sort of a mini network topology of how this whole thing is organized from some other tool that is typically used during my reconnaissance step, right. So, let us say that my router is actually having an IP of 192.168.1.1 and my victim that this person is trying to attack is basically having an address of 1.9, right, in the same network. Now, what we will actually do is we will open up two terminal windows, and on one window we will basically tell the victim that whatever packets it wants to send to the gateway should be sent to us, right. And on another window we will basically tell the gateway the reverse thing. So, we will tell the gateway that whatever it wants, whatever packets it wants to send to the victim, it will basically we will ask it to send it to us, so our node, right. So, how we will actually do that is we will run these two commands opspoof -t 192.168.1.9. So, we are basically telling that 192.168.1.9 is myself for this particular node, and in the second command in the second window we basically do the reverse, right. So, we basically say for 1.1 we say we are 1.9. Now, once we do this setup and it has been actually successfully set up, if we try to run any kind of packet capturing tools like a Wireshark or a TCP dump, we will start getting the packets that are actually intended for 1.9 or 1.1, right. Now, it will basically continuously keep sending the ARP reply from this particular set of messages, thereby the node 1.1 and 1.9 will contain the poisoned or the spoofed ARP entries of our own MAC address for both these IP addresses in the respective nodes, right. So, with that we basically sort of fooled both 1.1 and 1.9 that we are actually the other party, wherein actually speaking it would be the attacker who would have actually been getting the traffic from both these sides to it. Now, if we do not really try to send the packets after we have captured out to the final node, what is actually going to happen is that it is going to become little difficult for both those nodes to communicate with each other actually speaking, right. So, for that we do what is called as enabling of the IP forwarding for the packet to reach from victim to router finally. So, this is basically operating at the layer 3, where we say that we are going to forward the IP packets out across, and we are now going to act as a sort of a mini router in a way where we have the capability now to forward the packets itself. So, if we actually run the correct sysctl command and enable the IP forwarding functionality in our particular node, we will be able to have those packets forwarded to the actual machine, and then so that for example, if the victim is really trying to do a ping of the network gateway to find if at all there is any problem in reaching the gateway, because of this forwarding enabled in our node as the attacker node, he will actually, the victim will still be able to get the responses back from the gateway. So, in that way it will basically ensure that they do not really get an idea of the some attacker sitting in the middle trying to do the man in the middle attack. Now, once this is actually done, one of the ways by which you can actually sniff the packets traffic that is actually coming across is by using a tool called dsniff. So, with dsniff is actually available under the network sniffers sub menu option in Kali Linux. So, you could actually enable you could actually start the application from there, or alternatively you could also type it in the command line by using dsniff. Now, one of the options that it actually takes in the command line is the option of -i, where you could specify, for example, if your system from which you are trying to sniff the packets, the multi-home system, right. Now, what is a multi-home system? Multi-home system is a system wherein you typically have more than one network interface available with it. So, if you really want to sniff the packets only on one interface, for example, let us say ETH0, you could actually say use the -i option and then say -i ETH0 to the dsniff command. So, this will basically sniff the traffic that is actually coming on ETH0, and once the particular session is completed, it will go ahead and display the contents of the sniffed packets that it has done on that particular interface, right. So, in this case, if somebody is actually attempting something like an FTP or a telnet or something like that which is not encrypted and which is not secure, they will be able to see the user credentials and the passwords also as part of this sniffing, right. So, along with dsniff you do have other options which you could actually run for basically sniffing the traffic, but dsniff is actually one of the tools that is pretty commonly used for sniffing the packets on a particular interface as far as Kali Linux is concerned. Thank you.